All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Scientific Adventures for Girls' first speaker panel event. This is part of a series of events that we're doing as fundraisers for the organization, and we're so excited that you're here tonight to discuss the COVID variant, Women Who Lead, and discuss what the future holds for us coming and going forward. Thank you so much again for being a part of this. We're so happy to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. Scientific Adventures for Girls is so excited to be shining a spotlight on women who lead in STEM, and all of the funds raised through ticket sales and donations for this event go towards supporting the after-school STEM programs that Scientific Adventures for Girls offers at elementary schools in the Oakland and East Bay area throughout the year. I'm so excited to be your host for this conversation. My name is Alyssa Wright, and I'm a huge champion and supporter, as well as a contributor at Forbes Women, who's shining a spotlight myself on gender equality and philanthropy in this space. So I'm really honored to be here as your host and super excited tonight to moderate this incredible panel. So many of you may already know, but Scientific Adventures for Girls is an organization that was created to engage more young women in STEM. And starting in elementary school, they especially focus on girls of color, which represent about 90% of the girls in their organization's programs at this time. They create after-school programs that not only make STEM fun, but also builds girls' confidence around these areas. And again, tonight is a fundraiser, so keep looking ongoing in the chat box for the donation link. We'd love you all to support the organization while you're being inspired, educated, and informed by these incredible panelists and the incredible keynote speaker that we have tonight. So I thought I would share with you just a little bit about one success story, a real story of both success and significance, about a young woman coming out of Scientific Adventures for Girls programs. And as some of you may or may not know, as you've been getting to know this organization and its community, one of the main goals of the organization is to engage girls for the long term in STEM. And they really work to try to accomplish that by inspiring girls in their classrooms to return for more and more opportunities to be a part of STEM programs and different ventures. So I thought it would be particularly special tonight, and maybe this just resonated with me because I'm also a mom who's arriving to tonight's call and conversation. But I really loved hearing that Brianna, who's one of the young women who took 9 consecutive sessions over 3.5 years with Scientific Adventures for Girls, shared that it's so fun. She said, every day we get to learn about different things each and every time and how to make that thing. And we also have visitors, role models who come in. It's very interesting. We get to do so many hands-on projects. And this is a second grader talking about how she's starting to fall in love with the STEM field from a very young age because of Scientific Adventures for Girls. And I love Brianne's mother, Sabrina, who adds in and shares also her perspective and what's impacting her in this work, watching her daughter go through it. And she shares that Brianna's interest in science has definitely increased over the past couple of years. She has been involved with this organization. I've noticed that she is more confident in her work there. She comes home with a smile weekly because she has always created something new, and she enjoys telling me the step-by-step process of how she created the assignment that week. I appreciate this organization so much because without it, she would not have become my little scientist. So just wanted to share that with you all tonight as you kind of think about arriving in this work, with your resources and partnering with us as a donor to this mission as we go through tonight's panel discussion. So again, thank you so much for being here. So we want to just let you know as we move forward tonight that we have some really incredible sponsors who are sponsoring this event and supporting us in this series. A big thank you to Wareham Development, the longest and biggest funder of Scientific Adventures for Girls. They are graciously offering up a match of up to $25,000 from this event. And also supporting the September donor drive for the after-school program. So thank you so much, Wareham Development. We also want to thank Kaiser Permanente and Sandia Laboratories for sponsoring this event. Sandia is also sponsoring 8 virtual family STEAM nights this school year, and those are free and open to all. So if you're also in the Oakland Bay area, something to tune into and look at to be a part of. Finally, I really want to thank our impact sponsors, Grifols Pharmaceuticals and Pixar, for helping us to sell tickets to this event. So thank you all so much again for being our sponsors and our supporters, and all of you, almost 40 attendees we have here tonight that are arriving to this webinar to tune in. So all of you tonight showing up to support this work, thank you so much for being here. So we are so honored and excited to present this amazing panel of speakers to you today, which I should mention, just so you know, is also a recorded event. So it will be recorded and you will get to engage by way of a chat function. So feel free to put in questions and ideas that you would like to share, and I'll reflect those back and ask those questions at the end of tonight's panel. And so we're going to first have an incredible keynote speaker give some remarks, followed by our three panelists who are here with us tonight, Dr. Nicola Klein, Dr. Chantal Vogels, and Dr. Mehta. So we're so excited to have these three incredible panelists, but we will be kicking it off with some comments from Dr. Janet Woodcock, our keynote speaker. She is the acting commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, and she prepared her remarks for this event because she couldn't be with us, unfortunately, but we are so honored and grateful that she will be here to share with us. So I just want to share a little bit more about Dr. Janet Woodcock, the acting commissioner for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She began her long and distinguished FDA career in 1986 with the agency's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. There she was the director of the Division of Biological Investigational New Drugs. And at the FDA since then, she has led many groundbreaking drug initiatives. She also served in other leadership roles at the FDA, including Deputy Commissioner and Chief Medical Officer. And with the onset of COVID-19, Dr. Woodcock has been asked to lend her expertise to Operation Warp Speed, which is the initiative to develop therapeutics in response to the pandemic. She was named the Acting Commissioner of Food and Drugs on January 20th of 2021, so not too long ago, and she's received numerous honors, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. She's an avid and accomplished gardener, which is just a fun tidbit to throw in there. And with that, I'm going to share my screen with you all, and we're going to watch the keynote address from Dr. Janet Woodcock.
It's a great pleasure to be with you today. And I'm really sorry we couldn't be together in person, but I'm delighted to participate in this important event. I strongly believe that all of us in the scientific community and the business community and many others must help to support and stimulate girls and other kids' interest in science and make sure we provide meaningful opportunities for those who might otherwise not be encouraged to do so, or to have a chance to participate fully. This organization's mission, which is to remove systemic barriers to girls' participation in STEM while encouraging and engaging them in this type of learning, is such an important goal, and for so many reasons. Most obvious is simply the right thing to do, helping overcome an exclusionary and regressive approach to education and preventing the development and growth of negative stereotypes. But there's another reason to encourage opportunities for girls to engage in STEM and other disadvantaged students, which is it strengthens our scientific capacity and research generally, therefore helping to improve our whole society. Who knows how many brilliant minds could be developing cures or new approaches to treat diseases if we just encouraged and supported them. Who knows who'll be the next Marie Curie, Frances Kelsey, or Susan Ellenberg? You know, history is filled with far too many stories about girls whose curiosity for science, among other subjects and professions, was thwarted or undermined by someone who asserted that such a path was inappropriate for a girl. As Françoise Barré, the eminent virologist and 2008 Nobel Prize winner in physiology and medicine, commented, certain people, men of course, discouraged me, saying science was not a good career for women. But like so many women before and after her, Dr. Barré did not let that stand in her way. In fact, as she explained, opposition to her career choice pushed her to even more perseverance. I can personally appreciate some of the hurdles that many young women interested in the sciences face. Early in my education, I knew I loved science, but I didn't come from a science background or scientific family, and I was never particularly encouraged to go into science or STEM courses. In fact, at one point, when I talked about going into science as a profession, my family suggested I should probably just get married. And when I was in high school, we won a state science competition and advanced to the national finals were held at Princeton that year. I was overwhelmed by the school and the rigor of a scientific endeavor, and it really helped fuel my passion for science. So in 12th grade, when I was looking at colleges, I went to my guidance counselor in our little town school and said, I want to go to Princeton. To which she responded, basically, what's Princeton? Needless to say, I didn't go to Princeton, but I went to Bucknell University where I studied chemistry, as well as doing many other things. And then I went on to medical school and even continued my scientific training after that. But in fact, even when I interviewed for medical school, of course, this was a long time ago, but I did get a question from one of the interviewers who said to me, well, you probably will just have children, get pregnant, have children. We probably shouldn't, basically waste a slot on somebody who will follow that path. Now, today we're not seeing that anymore, but that's really where things were for many years. So I had opportunities to follow my passion, even though there were barriers, and it was really an important part of my development. And certainly, if times hadn't been changing and those doors hadn't opened for me, I would have been the worse for it, I think. That was at the time of beginning of a realization that women and girls had as much to contribute to the sciences, and there was a new openness. Now, eventually, after all this, I ended up at the FDA, which for a medical scientist is really a dream job. I say that not because I've had so many enriching experiences here at the FDA or because I'm acting commissioner. I say it because the FDA offers a virtual cornucopia of scientific possibilities to focus on. For example, today's discussion is on COVID-19. The FDA plays an important role in that response, which I'll talk about in a minute. But even as we respond to the current public health emergency, FDA staff have continued to meet our regular essential responsibilities to protect and promote public health, which are very expansive and varied. Now, to give you a quick idea what this encompasses, the FDA ensures the safety, efficacy, and quality of all human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, as well as our nation's blood supply. We also regulate cosmetics, dietary supplements, radiation-emitting products, and tobacco products. And of course, the first initial in FDA stands for food. We oversee the safety of most foods, including the tracking and tracing of many outbreaks of foodborne illness across the nation. Additionally, the FDA helps to speed innovations that make medicines and devices safer and more effective. And we ensure the public has accurate science-based information it needs to use medicines, devices, and foods to improve their health. What all this means is the FDA is responsible for overseeing about $2 trillion annually in medical products, food, cosmetics, dietary supplements, and tobacco. The products we regulate account for between 20 to 25 cents of every dollar spent on consumer goods in this country. But how we do this is the second reason why the FDA can be a research scientist's dream job. That's because nearly every aspect of the work we do to advance consumer and patient safety relies on the need for strong data and the best available science. Perhaps there's no better example of the ways we work to gather and evaluate enormous amounts of data than our response to the virus that causes COVID-19. It involves a careful balancing of scientific innovation and the need to ensure the safety and efficacy, in other words, whether they work, of medical products. What this can mean is often we're asked why we're taking so long to approve something. Or by contrast, why did we approve something so fast? The focus on speed misunderstands that our analysis and decisions are based on a review of the data we have. And if we don't have the necessary data, we have to make sure we get it. This process can be even more daunting and has been during public health emergencies, which by their nature demand faster responses and even greater innovation. During the current emergency, we have been challenged to the utmost by the need for new diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics. We created a very successful action plan specifically focused on the development of treatments for COVID. In addition, we used the emergency use authorization, commonly called EUA, to strengthen our response to the pandemic. As many of you may know, the EUA is a regulatory tool created by Congress after the 9/11 attacks. It's designed to enable rapid availability and use of medical countermeasures and life-saving products, including vaccines, during public health emergencies. Now, during this emergency, we've issued more than 400 EUAs covering nearly 800 medical products, including diagnostic tests, personal protective equipment, and of course, the authorization of 3 vaccines, including one that can be used in adolescents. The EUA process is a good example of how we continually evaluate the best available data. Even though the process for issuing an EUA for a vaccine is speedier than the formal approval process, the review is supported still by rigorous scientific standards. And the EUA is not the final step. As you may know, we recently approved the first COVID-19 vaccine. The FDA's extensive review relied not only on the company's comprehensive submission, but also involved the agency's independent analysis of the data. And we usually do that to review marketing applications. And the vaccine also continues to be available under EUA for various populations for which it's authorized. And so this work on vaccines, of course, is ongoing. While the COVID-19 vaccines authorized in the United States continue to be very effective in reducing risk of severe disease, hospitalization, and death, the available data suggests that protection against SARS-CoV-2 infection begins to decrease over time following the initial doses of vaccination and in association with the dominance right now of the Delta variant. The Biden administration announced a plan to begin offering additional doses of vaccine, what has been called a booster shot, this fall to maximize vaccine-induced protection and prolong its durability. These booster shots, whether if they come to pass, are subject to the FDA conducting independent evaluation and determination of the safety and effectiveness of an additional dose of these vaccines. Similarly, we're hoping to see the initial data that might support an emergency use authorization in the 5 to 11-year-old population, having that data perhaps come in by the end of September. The company has said, Kaiser has said that that's when they intend to submit it. And we look forward to seeing the data in the younger children. When that comes in, we'll review the data as rapidly as possible and come to a decision. I can't stress enough how important it is we evaluate the safety, effective, and dosing data for this age group from the clinical trials before the vaccine is administered to younger children. As we've learned time and time again, these children are not just small adults, and they may respond differently. What this reinforces is that our review process is a meticulous one and a dynamic one. We're constantly acquiring, reviewing, and evaluating data and expanding the evidence that we base our decisions on. It's an approach we take in every area where we have responsibility, whether we're evaluating a new medical product, tracing an outbreak of foodborne illness, or determining the safety of tobacco products, as we've been doing recently with e-cigarettes and other new tobacco products, all of which makes the work we do very challenging, very exciting, and very meaningful. And it's science-based. It's why we want to encourage the best minds to join us. And it's why we need to support all who want to study STEM fields, especially those young women or others who might not think they're suited for it or discouraged from others for taking this path. As Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman astronaut in space, said, "Don't let anyone rob you of your imagination, your creativity, or your curiosity. It's your place in the world. It's your life. Go on and do all you can with it and make it the life you want to live." I thank you for your attention today and for your commitment to this issue.
All right. Well, another big thank you to Dr. Woodcock for sending in her remarks. And again, we are so grateful and so honored that you would do so and send that in to us. Very inspiring. And thank goodness she took a slot, like she said, and had the career trajectory that she's had up until this moment. Really pretty profound for these times that we're living in. So I want to transition to the incredible panelists and start to have some conversation, because we are so lucky to have these three women with us today. And I want to just drop in another reminder again that tonight is a fundraiser. So if you're particularly inspired by something and you feel like making a donation to this work, that link is in the chat. So we welcome donations at all levels and do have that match incentive. So please give generously as you feel connected to this work tonight. So let me start off by sharing a little bit about all three of these incredible women that we have with us tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nicola Klein. She's a board-certified pediatrician, director of the Kaiser Permanente Vaccine Study Center, a research scientist at the Kaiser Permanente Northern California Division of Research, and a professor in the Department of Health System Science at the Kaiser Permanente Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine. Amazing. Her research has focused on vaccine safety and effectiveness, genetics of vaccine responses, vaccine safety among special populations, and the epidemiology of vaccine preventable diseases. She has led observational studies investigating the effectiveness of many vaccines, including pivotal studies describing effectiveness of, I'm going to say this right, I promise, a cellular pertussis vaccines in children and adolescents. And she's the principal investigator for both industry and federally sponsored phase 2 and 3 vaccine trials, including Myrna COVID-19 vaccines. So we are so excited she is here with us tonight. And thank you so much, Dr. Klein, for being with us. Next up tonight, we have Dr. Chantal Vogels. She is an associate research scientist in the Department of Epidemiology of Microbial Diseases at the Yale School of Public Health. Her main research interest is in the emergence, spread, and evolution of arthropod-borne arboviruses of public health importance. Dr. Vogels received her bachelor's and master's degrees in biology at Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. She completed her PhD and first year of postdoctoral research in medical entomology and arbovirology at the Laboratory of Entomology. And she also then she pursued a career as a postdoctoral fellow in the Grubog Lab at the Yale School of Public Health, where she is currently appointed as an associate research scientist. And since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Vogels has applied her expertise to the development of SARS-CoV diagnostic assays and genomic surveillance. Together with her colleagues, she developed Saliva Direct, a simplified and flexible platform to enhance testing capacity. And we're so thrilled to have Dr. Vogels with us tonight. And last, we have Dr. Mehta. She is an associate professor, Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, UC San Francisco, and she's the co-founder of Umoja Health San Mateo County. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Kala's research pivoted to understanding disparities in COVID-19. And in March of 2021, she co-founded Umoja Health in San Mateo with Lisa Teeler and Dr. Kim Rhodes. And their mission is to address disparities related to COVID-19 using a coalition approach, which is really important work. She also received her doctorate in epidemiology from the Erasmus University Medical School in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and has obtained postgraduate specialization in epidemiology and clinical research from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Mehta, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for bearing with me. I hope I did justice to your incredible bios and ways that you move through the world. So let's get started. I thought we could start tonight with something that's related specifically to Scientific Adventures for Girls mission and work. And Dr. Vogels, I'll start with you if you don't mind. I'd be really curious to hear from you about your journey as a woman in the STEM field, and what that has been like for you. And have you had mentors to inspire you and roadblocks? And kick it off for us on what it's been like.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us here. It's really an honor to be on this panel. Like you mentioned, I'm from the Netherlands. So I've had quite a journey ending up here in the US at Yale. I'm essentially the first in my whole extended family that pursued a scientific career, that got a college degree. So everything has been there's been a lot of firsts for the whole family. Like I'm the only one who's living abroad. And I would say it has not always been easy. It's exploring this new path, making these big decisions in your life. But for me, what has been really important is the support of all the people around me, particularly my family. They, as I said, they are not very familiar with science. So they maybe did not always fully understand the choices that I made or the directions that I pursued, but they always fully supported me. And that has been so amazing. So for instance, during my PhD, so I studied West Nile virus, a mosquito-borne virus. The whole family would actually help me to collect mosquito eggs in the field because the mosquitoes laid their eggs in rainwater barrels. So we would gather the whole family, we would start looking into these rainwater barrels. And that's really although they didn't fully understand what I was doing with these mosquitoes, they really supported me unconditionally. And that has been really key in my career path so far.
Oh my gosh, I love that. The family support for sure. That's awesome. Dr. Klein, tell us a little bit about your journey in this space.
Sure. I think I'm actually a Bay Area native, one of those few rare individuals. So I didn't have quite as much traveling as Dr. Vogels. But yeah, I think it's just been an ongoing journey. I think part of what I have found a little challenging is that I chose to go into medicine, and then I also chose to get a PhD while I was there. So I think that was really challenging because that's not a path that I think is, at least when I was doing it a few years ago, was as popular and probably as something that appealed to women as many. So I was, for example, in my class, I was the only woman out of 10 of us who were doing the combined degree. So that was a little bit challenging. And, I was very close to the individuals, but we definitely interacted differently and we had a different approach to, I think, learning. I think that was it was a bit of a learning for me during those years to really think about, being the only woman in that space, and just even with my own, peers, and how perhaps men might approach these things a little bit differently than a woman would. And I think the other thing that I think has been an interesting journey, and is that the path has been long. It's been a long path. It took me 7 years to finish medical school and graduate school, and then I did a 3-year residency in pediatrics, and then I did a 3-year fellowship in vaccinology. So it's been a long journey, and I think that has been something that I think that's not unique to being a woman, but I think it does create challenges along the way, just in terms of your own personal life and what how that impacts what you think about your own personal situation. So and so of course I've always had there's always been interactions here and there, and I was interested by Dr. Woodcock's story about how when she was interviewing for medical school, that she was asked why she would give you a spot, and while no one actually asked me that exact question, I interviewed a little bit later than Dr. Woodcock did, so it's still a while ago, but I do remember one of my first medical school interviews. The first thing, there was a woman actually who asked me. She asked if I was married. And I was in my early 20s, and I thought it was just a really strange question that she would even ask me, why did it matter if I was married? And it was an interesting question. I don't think that's a question that would be asked today, and I don't think that she would have asked it if I wasn't a woman. So I think that there has been challenges all along, and I think, I still find that there's many times. My field, actually, that I've sort of ended up in pediatrics and vaccines, it's perhaps a little more gender mixed, but so it's not quite as unbalanced as perhaps it once was early on in my career. But I think there's still there's always differences that come up, even at this stage in your career, that you sort of have to continue to be aware of and cognizant of, and think about, standing up a little bit as a woman more so.
Thank you for sharing. And Dr. Mehta, any similar challenges or barriers or family support? What do you have to share about your journey?
So I also am a San Francisco native, so local girl. But I have to say that my experience was maybe slightly different than both Dr. Vogels and Dr. Klein, in that I faced multiple overt challenges where people told me not to pursue science. And I had to overcome that. And through finding my tribe within science, I was able to go around it and then find a set of colleagues who really wanted to support the work. And those colleagues were BIPOC people. I sought out my African American colleagues, my Latina colleagues, my Asian Pacific Islander colleagues, and they formed a tribe around me. And even though I got a lot of overt negative reactions, I was able to continue in science. So if you're a girl out there and you look like me, or someone is like who would be in my tribe, you should know that there are going to be people who will support you if you look for them. So that's what I would say about my journey, and I would be super positive and super encouraging for the girls out there.
I love that. And thank you for also naming the importance of the intersection of race and gender and how important that is in this space. And I love how you talked about calling in your community and finding community and how that gets us through. So I really appreciate you naming that. So all of those challenges, thank goodness the three of you overcame them. That's awesome. And got your family to collect samples. There's that too. That's awesome. So let's talk about your journey, your career now, COVID-19, and now the Delta variant and the moment that we're in. I wonder if Dr. Klein, you can kick it off for us, talking a little bit about your most up-to-date findings and share with our audience of attendees who are listening in kind of how it's relevant for them in their world.
Yeah, so that's, as I think you mentioned, I spend all my time doing vaccine studies, and I've done that for the last, more than 15 years. That being said, the last year and a half has been, an interesting specific journey with regards to COVID. I mean, clearly early on there's no vaccines, but I always knew, and we always knew, there would be vaccines. It was pretty clear from the very beginning, the question of when, but we knew there would be vaccines. So we started preparing immediately to do, all sorts of different types of vaccine work, including just monitoring disease, and then with the expectation eventually we'll use those sorts of monitoring systems that we have within Kaiser. We use electronic data within Kaiser Permanente in Northern California, and my team, and with the expectation that when vaccines came out, we'd be ready to go to see how well they work in the real world, because that's sort of what we do for many vaccines. How well they work when you give to large, millions of people in the real world population. And also, I do a lot of safety work, mostly with CDC, Centers for Disease Control, but also actually with manufacturers of the vaccines. And so as part of the safety work, we've been leading a big study of the safety of the COVID vaccines, all COVID vaccines, but we just did had some results on more than 11 million doses that were given within a network that we work with the CDC. We actually look every single week at new data to see how safe the vaccines are. So there's been just, it's really just been relentless. I think, to use the word, it's been relentless. I'm doing clinical trials we've enrolled everywhere from anyone from 5-year-olds up until, 80 plus in the Pfizer COVID vaccine trials. We've been doing vaccine safety work, and then also doing work now on how well the vaccines work in the real world. So it's really all encompassing work that myself and my team have sort of shifted to doing, all within the scope of what I do normally, but it's usually not just all-encompassing for one vaccine. So.
And I'm curious, Dr. Vogels, for you, building off of what Dr. Klein shared in your findings, I know you're more on the diagnostic side of things, so I don't know where your work's at right now and what the last year has looked like, but I'd love you to share as well. That'd be great to hear.
Yeah, so you might wonder, how did I go from mosquitoes to COVID? Because that's quite a difference. Well, when I study mosquitoes, I'm actually mostly interested in the viruses they transmit. And the tools that we normally use to study these viruses are very similar. It doesn't matter if it's a virus that is transmitted by mosquitoes or if it's a respiratory virus. So the techniques are essentially the same. So really, when the pandemic hit last year, our lab was like, okay, this is like a huge public health emergency. We need to do something. So we used all our expertise to focus on COVID. And essentially, one of the first things we did, if you all remember, like especially early on, testing was very limited. So all the clinical labs had to validate their tests. There were not a whole lot of tests available because this was the new virus. People had to sort of build from scratch to get something going. So what we did is we first essentially wanted to build capacity locally. And that eventually resulted in the development of Saliva Direct. So it's a saliva-based test. So essentially the idea is you spit in the tube, you have a very simple processing of the sample, and then it's essentially a PCR test that detects whether there's virus present or not. And like Dr. Woodcock mentioned in her opening talk, we received EUA for that, emergency use authorization. So we've been through this whole process with the FDA to make sure that people can actually use this test as a diagnostic. And right now, the unique thing is that although we are a research lab, so we're not like a manufacturer, we essentially got an EUA for manufacturers. So we essentially shared our protocol, and then other labs could use it under our EUA. So that was all with the thought in mind of making the test as accessible as possible. It's relatively cheap. It's based on different available reagents, so there's nothing that is newly produced. So we essentially validated different set of instruments so that if a lab already has capacity, then they can essentially use that instead of having to buy new machines. So we try to make it as flexible and as accessible as possible to really help to fill that gap of testing that happens. More recently, we shifted more towards surveillance. So we're sequencing, so we're looking at variants. That's slightly different, but really like early on, we focused on the testing and making sure that tests were available.
Mm-hmm. And access seems really important. And Dr. Mehta, it makes me think of your work with addressing and looking at the disparities around COVID-19. And I also just want to name that you co-founded an organization, which I want to hear more about during this pandemic. So if you want to share a little bit about your work up until this moment, what the last year's been like for you.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel so privileged to go after Dr. Klein, who was instrumental in, helping us get to the point where we have vaccines, and then Dr. Vogels, who was instrumental in getting us tests. Now that we have both vaccines and tests, we need the community to use both of those tools to actually help us curb the pandemic. Right now, we are sitting in the US with 42.5 million cases as of today, and that's 680,000 deaths. Okay, that's a huge number. And in Alameda County, it's 117,000 cases. 117,000 cases and 1,330 deaths. That's huge for just our county alone. Okay, and so what do we really need? We need the community to come together around this pandemic and using the tools that Dr. Klein was so instrumental in making and Dr. Vogels was so instrumental in making in order to curb the pandemic. And that's what Umoja is all about. Umoja means unity in Swahili. And so what we did, we used a community-based participatory model to bring all the players in a county together to help solve the problem. We have partnership with Kaiser. We have partnership with Sutter. We have partnership with UCSF and Stanford. All these big people coming together to actually work with community members and hear what they have to say. So our research questions come from them. And the questions are around communication and vaccine openness. We don't call it hesitancy. We don't want to put the burden on somebody else. We call it openness. And so what are we doing? We're trying to address those questions so that we can really bring this COVID-19 pandemic to an end.
Mm. And Dr. Mehta, I'll stay with you for a minute because I'm really curious. I don't know if you'd be willing to share and dive in a little bit more around the specifics of providing and distributing the vaccine in communities of color. What are some of the specific things that folks should be aware of and should know from your work?
Certainly. I think that one of the key things that we should know from our work is that the sources of information from people in all communities vary, right? Our work shows that many people are getting their information about the COVID-19 pandemic through social media and other non-news sources, right? And so therefore, the messaging that we as scientists need to use must be on those platforms and must counter any mis or disinformation that may be present. So that's number one. And number two, I think, one of the things that Dr. Woodcock said about the FDA, they used Operation Warp Speed, but the community hears that and they think, oh, we hurried up and made a vaccine. But as Dr. Klein will probably agree, and I'd love to get her opinion on this, my understanding is that they went through all of the steps. Okay. And so communicating that is also extremely important, that all the steps were taken. And I'm so thankful that Dr. Woodcock and her colleagues at the FDA approved the Pfizer vaccine for 16 and up. And we are awaiting the further results, right? Because community members care about that and they want to know. I think it's all about communication at the end of the day. And that's why we founded Umoja Health to make that process a little simpler. And I would love to hear other opinions, though, about what you think it will really take.
Yeah, Dr. Klein, do you want to share a response?
Yeah, I'd love to actually. This has come up actually, and I've addressed this actually a number of times over the last year. I think the idea behind the Operation Warp Speed was phenomenal. Actually, we never had vaccines that have come out so quickly, so it's phenomenal. But I 100% agree that the name Warp Speed has caused a lot of people to be really worried that things really just were kind of thrown together. I can tell you, having done vaccine clinical trials for more than 15 years, when we started doing the clinical trials, we worked with Pfizer in particular. I'm not particularly promoting them, but that's who we've worked with for these COVID vaccines. And we've, ever since we started doing trials more than a year ago with them, enrolling studies, the studies look just like every other vaccine clinical trial that I've ever done, both with Pfizer as well as other vaccine manufacturers. I mean, there's no difference except that we just, we did it quickly. We enrolled subjects much faster, which all that meant was that I dedicated the staff to put more staff on it. It's not that there weren't shortcuts made. We just put more people on the project and didn't do as many other things. And so that's really what happened, but it looked just like every other trial that's happened. But it's really phenomenal that it happened so quickly. But that could get lost in confusion that perhaps it wasn't done safely and with all the right steps and all the right safeguards in place. But the communication has been challenging on that front. I think some of it has not been as much anymore, but I think certainly early on, there's definitely still some of it, for sure. There's a lot of that out there, but especially early on, I think there was a lot of that. And I will be honest that I think even people that my family or people that I know and people who normally would never think twice, they would ask me, say, "Is this one okay? Did it really go too fast?" And and I said, "Yes, it really is okay." And they said, "Okay," and that was good. But I think that I think I can understand why the public really was. There was a lot of question marks about that because it was so different, and it has been so different. But I can tell you, there's a lot of studies that we've done for these vaccines that don't get a lot of attention in the press. That there were routine studies that we did in addition to the kind of the studies that are getting the press, and the saying, "Oh, this is how well it works." We did a lot of studies also that we have always done for lots of different vaccines, saying, comparing how the vaccines were made and comparing different manufacturing, one vial versus another manufactured at a different time. And those are sort of routine studies that are always done when you have to get a new vaccine license. And for example, we did those also for the COVID vaccine, and that was all part of what had to be done to get a license. So it is more that had to be done. So I think all those steps were done, and they have been done, and they're continuing to be done.
And to stay with you, Dr. Klein, for a moment, I'm curious, can you talk about the moment with 12 and under and sort of what's to come and how that process and narrative correlates to this moment with younger people getting vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a lot of anxiety around that, of course, and understandable because, millions of children are back in school and parents want to make sure they keep their kids safe. So of course, and you're hearing about more and more kids getting sick with especially the current variants that are circulating in this country. So, we just finished a study enrolling for 5 to 11-year-olds. It's younger children are still ongoing. But I think, as Dr. Woodcock said, I think the intention is for the company to submit the data to the FDA. And just to give a little general idea of how the process works is that the FDA is limited in the sense that they can't approve a vaccine if the company that makes a vaccine, or anything, not just a vaccine, but any product, they have to actually submit and ask the FDA to be allowed to get a license or get an EU. The FDA just can't unilaterally say, "Oh, we will approve this." They actually have to be asked by the company, say, "Here's all the information, here's all the data, here's everything we know about it, and here's everything about our product. Will you approve it?" And so that, those types of things, they just can't come out and say, "Oh, we think there's an emergency for children, so we're going to approve a vaccine," but it has to be submitted to them first. And that process is in the process happening right now, and it's supposed to be, as I understand it, also Dr. Woodcock says, it's also sort of what I've been also hear publicly, is that the intention is to submit by the end of September. And then at that point, it's in the FDA's jurisdiction is in their hands to try and decide whether the data looks appropriate and safe and it works well enough to for younger children to use the vaccine. So it's always a process, and there are lots of very regulated processes, and there's other steps that the CDC has to happen. You probably hear about that much more now. And in the world of vaccines, there's actually a lot of processes that have been well established for 20, 30, more than that years, in terms of how vaccines are, evaluated, licensed, and then actually used in the real world, mostly traditionally in infants and children, but also in older individuals. There's a whole process in place, and all those processes have been followed in this instance as well.
I'm sure if there's one skill everyone in the audience tonight could probably resonate with, is having patience, grown to become a more patient person in this moment that we're all in. So and I think we'll probably require some future patience into the future as we learn more. And Dr. Vogels, it makes me think of your work and mutations and other variants and what the future looks like. Is there anything you can share with us around that and what you project and what you're seeing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much since the start of 2021, our lab kind of shifted focus from the diagnostic testing to sequencing. And sequencing is a technique with which we can determine which variants we're dealing with. So it's essentially you read the genetic code of the virus and then determine which variant it is. And that is really important because you want to know which variant is circulating, because if some variants are better able to spread, or if there are some that where therapeutics might not work as well. You kind of want to know what's going on in the area so that you can adapt your control strategies. So initially, early on in like January this year, we saw alpha come up. Right now, we see that actually our surveillance system is kind of boring. And it's a bit weird to say, but like all that we're sequencing now is delta. Like it's almost 100%. It's all delta. So every week we test all these samples, and the outcome is, oh, it's again delta. And I would argue that that's not so much because it's like better at escaping from vaccines, but it's really the higher transmissibility of delta, that it's just spreading very quickly in the population. And then to get back to your question of like what can we expect next? Well, I would say we're probably going to deal with delta for a bit, but the way that I see it is as long as the virus is being transmitted, there's a chance that it can change. Mm-hmm. So as long as transmission keeps going, there might be changes that pop up, and then maybe a new variant will emerge. So what is really key here is that we stop transmission. And I think vaccines are a really, really powerful and great tool to stop the virus. But we need more than that. Like it's vaccines, it's the getting still tested, it's wearing face masks, it's social distancing, ventilation. We have all these tools in our toolkit, and I think we really should be clever with how to use them. And like Dr. Mehta was saying, like how do we get them like in the community? How can we convince people to use it? Because like tools might be out there, but they need to be utilized to really stop transmission and ultimately end this pandemic.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think before we transition to getting some questions from the audience tonight, so please start to populate the chat with good questions. And if you find yourself in the chat, the donate link is also there, and we refreshed it. So now it's happy and it works, and you can process Yield credit card for this organization in a fabulous way. So just know that that's been updated in the chat for you all. And please start to add in some great questions for our panelists. This is actually a really rare and powerful opportunity. I'm a little upset that I'm just, moderating and I don't get to put a bunch of questions in the chat of my own, because I think you all are brilliant. And as a mom, I have so many questions. But I just wanted to kind of end on this question. Dr. Mehta, maybe you can start us off. Is, personal growth. How did you grow as a scientist this year? A skill, a wisdom, an awakening, so to speak, of any kind. Sort of what was your growth as a scientist in the last year and a half?
Yes, absolutely. So, prior to the pandemic, or at the beginning of the pandemic, I firmly believed in the NIH framework, which talks about T1 to T4 translation, right? Translation from molecules to populations. And really that framework would guide us well. And I think that now, having been through 18 months of the pandemic, I realize the importance of that last piece, community awareness and community, the role of the community in this T1 to T4 translation, and how incredibly important it is. And so I would say I grew to realize that we as scientists need better tools at that last level, right? That level of basically going from what we know is stellar science in the clinical laboratory, right? And then translating it to the population. We need better tools there. And I think one other key thing that I learned is that we need to work together. There are so many silos within medicine and within public health that's brought a chasm between those two fields. And we need something to fill that gap so that the public doesn't suffer, so that we can bring things together. So those are things that I learned, and that's what our team is really working on right now. So
thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Klein?
Well, I think part of being a scientist is just as part of your growth and your career, you always have to learn how to be adaptable and learn how to really pivot when the data takes you there, when things change or life change, things happen. You have to learn how to change and adapt. And you also have to have a plan B, really, in the science. But I would say that with the last year and a half, I think that has been taken to quite an extreme. And I don't think that probably is limited to science. I think we've all experienced that in many ways about having to be adaptable and changing and just expectations. In terms of personal growth, what I actually am most interested in is what's going to happen when we finally get a little bit out from the other side, and how much what has happened how much things have changed in science and the speed and the just everything that's changed so much in the field, that the expectations of things happening so quickly, how much of that stays once things kind of quote go back to normal, which I guess you could argue whether that will ever happen. But I think that's I think I'm really interested in what will stick, what will sort of say, no, that was really just a temporary thing that we don't, that was an adaptation we made because we had to. That wasn't something that we wanted to. And I don't whether it's working remotely or not, but even more in the weeds in your career and job, and how you had to do things differently, and perhaps better, perhaps not always so much better. So I think those are the sorts of things that I'm very interested in.
Thank you for sharing. And Dr. Vogels, what for you?
Yeah, I can totally relate to what Dr. Mehta and Dr. Klein have been saying. I think on top of that, for me, like the last 1.5 years, I've learned so much through teamwork. We've been working with such an incredible team, and like if you would have told me, like, let's say 2 years ago, like all these things that we've been doing, and like at this pace, so fast, just indeed moving from one end to the other, just being adaptable, just people from different backgrounds, different fields, all coming together, all united to try to end this pandemic. That is so inspiring to me. We've had so many students come in. So we're based in the Yale School of Public Health. So we have a lot of MPH students, even coming in with like not much background, and like, because who else had really like, the background of like, how do you deal with a pandemic? But everyone just stepping in and like dedicating like everything they had, that has been so inspiring. And I think from our team to like just the broader collaboration we've had, I think that's really like something that I have not seen before in my career, of like just people stepping in and just all one goal, all together, let's do this.
I love it. I love it. All right, so let's transition to the chat. Dr. Klein, we have a specific question for you. What have we learned about vaccine production or approvals that will drive change for the future? And that question comes from Katie.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that sort of speaks a little bit to what I was sort of referring to just in my comments before, how much is lasting and how much will change. And, I think part of well, the truth is I don't know, of course, but I think, in terms of vaccine production, well, certain things there's always has to be the standards and what have you, and the reproducibility and all that sorts of things. But I think just in terms of technology, I think the mRNA technology in and of itself is definitely going to be a driver for many new vaccines, I predict, as well as probably other vaccines, other treatment aid. My guess would be other, areas of medicine for treatment for drugs or something else that could be perhaps adapted to. In fact, BioNTech, who actually started the technology, Pfizer partnered with them. It's actually BioNTech's technology for the mRNA for their vaccine. They actually started off using their technology to treat cancer. And so I think that certainly you could envision a future where that becomes even more prominent and for other treatments for other diseases. With regard to the approvals, I think that's an open question, because the FDA traditionally has taken a company would submit and they'd have a year to approve it for licensure, and clearly that's been sped up. This process has been sped up, but I don't know how lasting that sort of change. The truth is, it's not sustainable to be working at the level that me, my team, and all the people in the field that everyone I work with has been really very busy last year, and it's not sustainable for a very, very, very long time. So I think that's sort of a little bit we'll have to see how that, I think, pans out. But it's certainly shown that things can be done much faster than people thought. And certainly mRNA, the technology can be done much faster. In terms of making a new vaccine is much, much faster than some of the traditional ways of making a vaccine. That step has been clearly made much faster.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Before we take 2 more questions from the chat, I just want to remind everyone that tonight's a fundraiser. We have dreams and hopes for 100% participation in making an additional gift tonight. So if all 50 attendees that we have can go and click on that chat and give anywhere from $5 to $500, we'd love you to step further into this work with us. And remember, you're looking at the present right now, and some of the future leaders are in Scientific Adventures for Girls program. So we think it's really exciting for you to kind of think about that, and from that place, consider clicking and making an additional gift as we go through the last questions tonight with these incredible scientists. So we have another question here, which I think is really interesting and might be an entire webinar that we do in the future in and of itself. But hey, we've got 9 minutes. Let's go. How would a national healthcare program have helped with the initial response to this and other epidemics? So I don't know who might want to take that question first, or any thoughts that anyone has initially. Dr. Mehta, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I do also do some work in global health. So certainly comparisons do get made between the United States and other countries that have had national health care programs. So in essence, socialized medicine. And actually, compared to many countries, we have actually done really well here in the United States with the rollout, despite all of the initial hurdles and challenges. I don't know that instituting a national healthcare program here would have helped with the initial response. But one potential area where it may have worked is really by reducing confusion in terms of information from many different providers in the environment. I think that's one place where it may have helped. But I think that we have to understand that in the United States, it may be less likely to roll out a national healthcare program just because of the structure of our government.
And the other question we have that came into the chat is, and Dr. Klein, perhaps this is one for you as well. Can you address the difference and effectiveness of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine?
Sure. So I'm sure probably everyone here knows that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a little bit different. It's a different type of vaccine than the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines. It's based on a virus that that has been genetically altered to prevent to what's called express or make the spike protein for the COVID vaccine, and then your body responds to that, gets your immune response. So it's not that different than mRNA, but it's a different way of getting that information into your cells using these viruses instead of an mRNA product. So it's a virus. That vaccine has been used for other. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the basic of the virus that was used, the inactive virus, it's called the vaccine, doesn't cause infections by itself, has been used for another vaccine by Johnson & Johnson. It's called the Ebola vaccine. So it's the same base of the Ebola vaccine is what was used for this one. So that's one difference between that. It's a different type of technology. The other thing is, of course, as everyone knows, it's a 1 dose versus 2 doses. And so that's one of the big differences between the two. And it's a big benefit that you do get some good protection, especially against severe disease and death with 1 dose. But the 2 doses do seem to work better. And in fact, that just came out yesterday. I think this was from the New York Times. It wasn't the Scientific as usual. Everything comes to the newspaper now first. But they announced that when they finally the results of 2 doses seem to work better than 1 in terms of protecting against, having to go to the hospital or severe death. So it's not surprising. It's really most vaccines do need more than 1 dose. It's because you have something that your body's seeing for the first time, and so you get that extra response from your immune response when you see something once, and sometimes even more. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 doses. And for infants and babies, that's why we actually give 3, sometimes 2 and 3 sometimes even 4 doses, because their immune system is still maturing, still learning, and you're kind of training it and teaching it about things. So it's more unusual to have a vaccine that you just give once, especially for something new, the new virus that's new to the whole race, all new to humans that have never been seen before. So, I think that you actually got a good amount of protection with one. It's actually amazing. But, I don't think anyone's too surprised that 2 doses do, from what I've seen, again, in the newspaper, appears to work better.
Great. Thank you for sharing. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if you have them, please feel free to get them in there because we have these panelists with us for a few more minutes. I guess just maybe a closing note from each of you. I'd love to hear if there's a young girl listening tonight that is in a moment of doubt and maybe some imposter syndrome, or this isn't the field for me, or someone just told her, no, this isn't the place for you, or you're not smart enough, you're not the right person for this work. What would maybe your advice be to her as she's listening in tonight? Dr. Vogels, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I would say follow your dreams. Like, the sky is the limit. Like, if you're passionate about something, go for it. Like, don't let anyone tell you no, because yes, you can do it. And I feel like probably a lot of people, like, this imposter syndrome, like feeling that you're like not good enough, that might sort of stay, but it should not slow you down. Like, you should just go for it. Just, you got this. Like, you should just follow your dreams.
Thank you. Dr. Klein?
I mean, I would echo that. I would also actually encourage people, anyone who's interested, try and find people who help you. And if you get discouraged and someone gives you some negativity, find someone else. Like, there's people out there who want to help you. And if you don't find that in the first 2, 3, 4, 10 people you talk to, find someone who will, because they will help you. And those are the people. I can look back in my career. Those are the handful of people who you've sort of run into, and those are the ones that really changed everything and really made things different. And keep looking for that person, because you can do it, even if you don't think you can. Other people do, and remember that. And I think that's what you need to remember. And people will help you. And if you let people know you want some help and this is what you want, people will help you, because right now you may not feel like you know even the path forward, but find someone who can help you find that path too.
Awesome. Dr. Mehta?
So I agree with both of what Dr. Vogels and Dr. Klein just said. But what I would add is, if you're out there, we need you, because you probably have something that is like community cultural wealth. You know more about your community than all the scientists on this panel. You know more about your neighborhood, your street, and that is a wealth, and we need that in science. We need to change the institution of science so that it can incorporate all of that knowledge and even indigenous knowledge into science. So I would say we need you to keep going in science for that reason. And if you are interested, you're welcome to come join. If you have a naysayer, you're welcome to come join Umoja Health, because you'll get a lot of positives from that. So I'll end on that.
I love it. What is it? Is it June Jordan, the great poet, who says, "We are the ones we've been waiting for. It's time for us to rise." I love that poem. So follow your dreams, find your people, find your community, and just remember that we need you. So I just want to thank all 3 of you so much for being here tonight. I learned so much. I'm feeling really inspired. I'm definitely going to go make a donation after tonight, because I'm really motivated to continue to invest in this work and a vision of a world with a lot of girls, and a lot of girls of color in particular, in this space and rising up into this work. And I want to take a moment for you all who are joining in tonight that we still have here with us to put some gratitude in the chat to our panelists. And also a big thank you to Dr. Janet Woodcock again. I know you couldn't be with us, but we're so honored to have you send in a message. We definitely had your energy and your wisdom surrounding us throughout tonight's event. I also want to just really quickly share my screen with you all and just say a big thank you to our sponsors once again, Wareham Development, who has a $25,000 match out there. So if you're listening in and you or your company is in a position to match and support and give tonight or in the coming days, please reach out to the team at Scientific Adventures for Girls. We really do need your support to continue this programming. We rely so much on philanthropy and your generosity to do this work well. And then again, Kaiser Permanente, Grifols, Sandia National Laboratories, Wright Collective, and Pixar. How cool is that? Pixar, awesome. So thank you all again so much for being here. And with that, we'll let you get back to your evening. Stay in touch, click the donate link, process a gift tonight before you head off to dinner or wherever you're headed next. And just thank you so much on behalf of the entire organization. Deep gratitude to you all for taking the space to be here tonight and listen and learn with us with these incredible women.